Hello, geeks. Welcome to Geeking Out, the podcast about all geeky aspects of software delivery, DevOps, observability, reliability, and everything in between. I'm your host, Adriana Vilela, coming to you from Toronto, Canada. And geeking out with me today is Carmen Huidobro. Welcome, Carmen.
Thank you so much for having me. Hey, everybody, all listeners. It's an absolute joy to be here.
I am so excited to have you on, and it's really cool how I got you on the podcast was because I think Marino with Jay
Mm-hmm.
did a shout out of like all amazing people that should he did a tweet about like, oh, these are some awesome people that you should totally have on your podcast. I'm like, awesome. And your name was on there, and so I replied to that tweet. I'm like, anyone on that list, like, let me know, DM me. You can be on the podcast.
Honestly, like I'm so grateful to Marino and also you for like laying down that groundwork. I don't know what I was thinking that day. I was feeling like oddly bold. It's like because I saw your post and I was like, you know what? I am gonna reach out to her and just sort of like very
Yes.
bravely be like, hey, I'd love to.
I am so glad that you did. I love it when people take me up on my offer. So yeah.
No, I appreciate it.
Yay. Well, as we start off, are you ready for the lightning round, lightning slash non really not really lightning round questions?
Awesome, let's go.
Okay. All right. First question. Are you a lefty or a righty?
I'm a righty, but I was born a lefty. But like so I
Ooh.
was growing up in Chile at the time, and my grandmother did not like it, and she was like forcing me to like try and like write with my right hand. So like I do some stuff sort of lefty, but like 90% righty.
Oh, okay. So your like brain was retrained on the
Yeah.
rightiness. Ooh, cool, cool. Yeah, my mom, I'm a lefty.
Mm.
My mom was also a lefty, and she was
Oh wow.
forced to do things left-handed by some angry nuns. But she was like one of those like you can't take the lefty out of me, and
Yeah.
she just couldn't like as much as the nuns tried to do it. She just nope, not happening.
So they tried to train her out of being a lefty, right?
They did,
Yeah.
and it did not work. Yeah,
Oh
they,
wow.
because I think, like, she would hold her fork with her left hand,
Yeah.
and they're like, "Nope," and so they'd make her sit in the cafeteria, trying to eat with her right hand,
Yeah.
and if she didn't, she would, like, either not eat or whatever, like,
Wow.
if there was some sort of punishment,
Yeah.
or I think she missed recess because she was stuck at the cafeteria, like, trying to eat with her right hand, and so she
Wow.
was, like, thoroughly traumatized, so for her, it was, like, almost like the visceral reaction of, like,
Yeah.
"Nope, I'm a lefty for life on all the things."
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean kind of, I mean, I wasn't at school when they were doing this, but like my grandmother was very very adamant about like, nope, she has to be a righty.
"Thou shalt be ready." Alright, next question, do you prefer iPhone or Android?
I alternate because I'm undecided and boring. But
Ooh.
I started out as a Mac developer, so like there is a sort of like propensity to stick with like Apple products. So I'm currently on an iPhone 12 mini, and I'm kind of annoyed about it because like it's the second last mini they made, and I have small
Yeah, yeah.
hands. And I don't understand why phone manufacturers don't like people with small hands. Bring back the
I
mini,
don't know, I love the size of the mini.
right? So like, yeah, I have to get a new phone soon because this one's starting to run out of battery, and like I don't know what to get. How about you?
I know. I've had an iPhone since the 3GS.
No way. That was my first phone
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. Yeah, so, before that, I had a BlackBerry, and before that, I
Ooh.
had an LG Chocolate, which I adored. It
Mm,
was
love
one of
that.
those, like, do you remember the slider phones?
Yeah,
It was a
totally.
slider phone, and, like, they became, like, really popular because of The Matrix.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it was cute, it looked like a little candy bar, it was, like, tiny in your hand, and I adored that phone, and then Blackberries came out, and I love my Blackberry until it
Yeah.
started to spontaneously shut off in the middle of phone calls, and then I got really angry,
Oh,
and so we retaliated and bought iPhones.
fair enough. Fair enough. I had a Motorola Razor. I don't know if you're familiar.
Oh
Like
my god,
the
those were
flip phone.
beautiful.
I love those. I miss it honestly.
Yeah, yeah, those were beautiful phones. I mean, even like its predecessor, like you remember the StarTAC?
Oh my god, yes.
Like, I mean, at the time, I'm like, oh my god, this is like the coolest phone ever, Especially like I carried around this like it was like a Sanyo brick phone,
Yeah,
which at
yeah.
the time was like, oh, this is so tiny compared to those like really big ass phones that
Oh yeah.
fortunately I never had. I'm not that old.
Oh gosh. Same. Yeah.
Phone memory lane. Awesome. Okay, next question. Do you prefer Mac, Linux, or Windows?
Mm,
Mm.
so I recently I like to so I have a PC that I built back in 2018, like the first PC I ever built, and I love it to bits, but it was getting too slow. So I did something very, very wild for me, which I mean it doesn't sound that wild. I installed a liquid cooler into it, right?
Oh.
Uh which is a lot more complex than it sounds. It's really just sort of like, you know, doing putting in some parts and plugging stuff in. It wasn't nearly like as complex as it sounds. But what that means is that, oh my gosh, I'm motivated to work on my PC again. So I got on back on Linux and I missed it, honestly. I'm really enjoying working on Linux right now. But I started out as a Mac developer, so it has a soft spot in my heart. Windows exists. I use it.
Yeah, I feel it. It's funny. I have Windows PTSD because
Oh,
I
really?
used it for so long
Yeah.
and in under such corporate settings that I have like this very negative association with
Mm,
Windows. Even though like Windows was I guess my first operating system was DOS, but Windows was my first, I guess, like proper GUI
yeah.
OS. But I cannot like I should feel some nostalgia for it, but I honestly I feel PTSD for it, and Macs kind of represent like phase two of my career where I've
Oh,
like
yeah.
it's the enlightenment of my career where I've moved away from the corporate you know mindset.
Oh, I so feel you because I'm actually in that right now. I last no earlier this year I started consulting with an SAP consultancy. Do you know SAP? Like the
My
ancient German.
husband works in SAP, like
No
that is
way.
his career. Yes, yes, yes. Like 20, I want to say 28 years doing SAP, like ABAP, performance tuning, like that is his jam.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever
I,
taken
I
a look.
should connect you.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I appreciate it because I'm like, I started consulting with him, but like working on them, bringing sort of like my developer relations and developer education side aspect to it. But I've also, been picking up at ABAP and SAP GUI and all that stuff. And like, good golly, what a completely different world that is. And like,
It is.
and of course, that means that I need to have a Windows machine because like, you know, it's completely like, what do you mean Linux? What do you mean open source? Like,
I
you know?
know, right?
And like, so I've been just rediscovering Windows in a corporate context and like, it hits different.
It does hit different. Yep, yep, yep. But the Windows salvation is the Windows subsystem for Linux.
Yes, yes. In fact, like when I built my PC like a long time ago, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna work with WSL, like Windows Subsystem for Linux, and I loved it. I still do. And
Right?
whenever I'm onboarding folks to like if they're new to programming and they're like starting out, I love to like very very gently. I'm not some kind of like adamant person who's like, oh, you have to do this, but I'm definitely like, if you're having trouble installing Node on your machine, have you heard of Windows Subsystem for Linux? That sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, the last time I had a Windows machine, the first thing I did was install WSL.
Absolutely. Same here.
Yeah, I mean it's a whole other experience. It makes Windows a kinder, gentler.
Oh, absolutely. And like honestly, like I'm very grateful it exists because it gives folks an opportunity to get into programming a lot easier, or like get antiquated, to get antiquated. Is that the term? Familiar with,
Acquaint-
yeah, acquainted. That's what I wanted to say. With these kind of tools that folks are working with on a day to day basis, but like a lot more accessible. My I had a client that I used to work with. So I've done a ton of freelancing in my career, and like one of my favorite client experiences was this was a client in gastronomy for like local businesses in like the industry area of Vienna, and we were doing
Mhm.
like lunch, like like corporate lunch for them and stuff, like the gastronomy and like catering and all that stuff. And my job was to build their POS or point of sale system, right? And of course, every office that they would deliver to would have a different kind of thing. And like I was doing a lot with like thermal printers and stuff for their like receipts and stuff. By the way, thermal print, you know thermal printers, right? Like I
Mhm.
it
Mhm.
never occurred to me that they don't use ink, but in fact they burn the paper. Like how metal is that?
I know,
uh,
right? It's like
oh, absolutely. And like the protocol for like printing to them, like like the one we use was the ESCP POS protocol for printing, is so versatile. It's kind of cool. Anyway, um and I wrote a system that like worked very nicely with like Linux and like writing over serial to the USB port on the printer itself, and that was all well and cool. And then my client's like, cool, well this client has a Windows machine, so we should just like a Windows POS, we should just do it with that. And I was like, oh yeah, no problem. I'm sure like writing to like ports on Windows is going to be completely easy. And like 48 hours of like reading C documentation for like WinDLL or something, I was like, maybe I'm not a programmer after all.
Oh my god, the DLLs. Crap, I remember those.
I never wrote one. Like we ended up giving up, and like I think what we ended up doing in the end was the most like hacky thing in the world, which is just like, let's just buy a Raspberry Pi and send it data over Wi-Fi to print to the printer. And hey, it works, and
That
it's
sounds
still being used to this
awesome.
day. Oh yeah, yeah, no, it was great. I love that. I gave a talk about that at a Ruby conference. It was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. That sounds like such a great solution.
Oh, it was super fun.
All right, next question.
Oh yeah.
What's your favorite programming language?
Oh no. So I okay, I do have an answer. So I mentioned I started out as an Objective C developer. Well, I just gave it away. I started out as a Mac developer, and at the time, not to age myself, the only programming language for Mac OS was Objective C. And I don't know if you know Objective C. It's weird. It's got an odd syntax. You send like you don't send messages using a full stop, as you would like object dot method. Instead, you do it with square brackets. So like
Oh,
square
interesting.
brackets object message. And if you want to like use that as a parameter, no problem. Just surround it with more square brackets, and you can end up with like an inception of like several square brackets. And like it
Oh
gets a
my
lot of
god.
and it gets a lot of criticism for having an odd syntax. It's still small talk like, but the reason it's my favorite programming language is because I now jokingly say like I started out in Objective C, nothing can hurt me now. And like it taught me to be flexible. It taught me
Yeah.
to like appreciate like object orientation, like the essentials of small talk and that sort of thing. And I'm really grateful for it. But after that, I don't know, I think I associate programming languages with like stages of my career or my life.
Oh
Cause
yeah, yeah, yeah. I could
right?
definitely see that.
Yeah.
Totally.
So after that I was like all of our tooling for our apps and objective were written in Ruby, because my client was a big fan of of Ruby on Rails, and this was like early 2010s. And so I went into Ruby on Rails, and I love Ruby, like especially like the European Ruby community has such a special place in my heart, that like I because like right after like getting into that, then I started feeling a little bit isolated as a freelancer. And then I sort of started like okay, believe it or not, I'm a shy person. And like I started like dipping my toes into like going to meetups and stuff, but it was very intimidating. And like Objective C, I think the German language gets a bad rap, because it's like especially for like myself, I come from like a Romance language. I come from Spanish, and like yeah, German is hard to learn, but I think it gets, I don't know. there's a certain beauty to its modularity, for example. That
I
like
agree with you.
right?
I totally agree with you. I think German is so beautiful.
I agree 100%. Like, don't get me wrong. It's hard. It's got its rules. It's like, articles, the daddy das, like for assigning to nouns is it's difficult,
Oh my god, yes.
right?
Yes.
I gave up, honestly.
Just make shit up as you go along.
Look, people are gonna know what you mean, like,
Right,
regardless
right.
of
It's like pray. Yeah. Yeah,
don't get me
yeah, I feel
wrong,
you.
respect to the language and all of that. But like, anyway, so the meetups were like super intense and very like, I mean, if you're familiar with like the tech scene, especially in like German speaking countries, there's this like sort of not anarchistic per se, but there's a very like hacker. Like, are you familiar with that sort of German hacker culture?
Somewhat ish.
Like the they call it the demo scene. They do like lots of like graphics and music stuff, and it's very like anti-authoritarian and that sort of thing, and like very
Right, 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 right,
a
right,
little bit.
right. A little
Yeah.
bit kind of like in the Hackers movie, that kind of vibe.
Oh, I was a complete side note. I was at EMF camp a few weeks ago, and like they have which is like a nerdy camping event, but with Wi-Fi and electricity and like all of that stuff and talks. And actually,
Amazing.
I gave a workshop on how to get into public speaking and tech speaking at that event a few weeks ago. It was good fun. I'm not a very good camper, but regardless, they show that movie every time.
Yeah.
And they have the director there for a Q&A, which is pretty cool.
What?
Yeah.
That movie has a special place in my heart. Like, my husband and my daughter hate it. I'm like, "But it's so bad, it's good. Come on."
I thoroughly enjoyed my time watching it. But
It's a hoot.
I kind of distracted myself. Favorite programming language. So like Ruby, like I started going to the Ruby meetup and like very quickly got onboarded into like Rails Girls Summer of Code, and like lots of like, more sort of like humanitarian stuff related to code. And so like I did a lot of that with Ruby for a couple of years. And then a couple of years ago, my friend Jess and I started teaching JavaScript and HTML, and like, especially when I talk to folks who do like more back end or low level programming, and they go like, "Oh, JavaScript is weird," and I was like, "I know, isn't it great?" I have a soft spot for it. And then like I started getting integrated into the Rust community, and like at least here in Europe, they're all so wonderful. I don't know. Maybe my favorite programming languages are associated to the respective communities.
I mean, and that's such a great association to make. Like, you
Totally.
have a nice community, and you feel like it inspires you to learn more
Yeah.
because you like the people around it, right? And I think it's funny you mentioned Ruby, because I've had a number of people on the podcast who are big fans of Ruby, and
No way.
everyone talks about the Ruby community.
I mean, they are pretty great.
Can't beat that. Can't beat that.
I'm curious, may I ask, like, what's yours?
Right now I would say Python. So I was
Ooh,
a longtime Java developer,
cool.
15 years. So I got on the Java bandwagon like in the late 90s, early 2000s. So when Java
Awesome.
was pretty new, I was like, I got onto it because my dad he's a retired software architect. He learned Rust for fun last year.
As one
And
does.
he just made like we were chatting on the phone. He made his first contribution to what is the Rust library thing called? Not the package manager, like the library, like where people put their like their
Oh,
homegrown libraries.
crates.io.
Crates.
That's
Yes,
it.
that's it.
That's it.
Yes, yeah.
Cool.
He published his first crate last week. I'm like, what? And my dad's turning 71 this
That's
year. Yeah.
amazing.
So yeah, but I got into Java because of my dad. My dad got into
Oh,
Smalltalk when Smalltalk was like the thing, and then it was like Java, Java, Java. Now he's like
mhm.
Java is an anti-pattern because object-oriented programming is an anti-pattern. And then he did Go for a while. And now he's like, I hate Go. Rest, rest is where it's at.
I mean, that's
So
that's something I find so liberating about programming languages and technologies in general is that, opinions come and go, like best practices come and go. And like I find being able to like recognize patterns and like bring over knowledge and even use that prior
yes,
knowledge to challenge current knowledge so helpful. The one I always think about is I was doing lots of Ruby on Rails, and then like I kind of missed like the major hype of single page applications. Like did a little bit of Backbone JS, if you're familiar, like way back when, which is like one of the first like single page application frameworks and stuff. And then like, but when I started really getting into stuff like React and Vue and all of that, everyone's like super excited about server side rendering. It's the future. It's here. And I'm like, wait, we stopped doing that? And like things come and go. Like everyone in
Yeah.
like a lot of folks in like the Next.js world are super excited about like RPCs and TRPCs, and I'm like, do y'all mean remote procedure calls? Because like, don't get me wrong, they're fantastic. Like, I didn't know they were gone. You know, I love
Yeah,
stuff
so
like that.
true, so true. Yeah, it is very cyclical.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like programming languages, like it's also a thing. Like the thing I hear a lot with them is like my favorite programming language is the one that I'm using right now, which is
Oh yeah,
cool. It's
totally.
like, yeah, whatever. I'm down to learn new languages because it's exactly what you said. You like you start to recognize patterns
Yeah.
between languages, and I think that's one of the things that I enjoy about learning new languages is like, oh, how is the thing done in this compared to the thing done here, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, and I think it's that process of discovery and then learning the nuances, and then this language does this so poorly, I love how this language does that. And I think that's what I love. It's that discovery of programming languages for the first time. It's like falling in love for the first time.
Absolutely. And then like excitement of like how something is done. And then you bring it back to your programming language. One of my favorites is when Objective C introduced blocks, which are anonymous functions, right? And subjectively, the syntax is pretty gnarly for them. Like I know like what are the what's that sign, the little arrow that goes, is it a carrot? The one that goes like
Yeah,
the
the
up sign.
carrot.
Right.
Yeah,
It
the
involves
ones that are like that,
it,
right?
yeah, but it's upwards.
Oh
Like
yeah, 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 yeah,
when you want to
yeah,
do to the
yeah,
power of.
yeah. That's yeah,
I think that's a
yeah,
carrot as well. Could be wrong. But
yeah. I
anyway,
think it is a carrot. Yeah,
yeah, most I think so, yeah. But
I would
like
say yes.
it's pretty gnarly. It involves one of those. It involves ampersands. It involves like curly bracket. It's pretty like doesn't curly brackets doesn't sound that bad, but anyway, it's pretty weird. So much so that for a very long time, I looked it up recently. It doesn't exist anymore. There was a website called effing blocks, um, which all of its purpose is to remind folks how to do block syntax in Objective C because it was
Oh
that
my god.
weird. And I love that. That sort of like not spite per se, but like
Oh yeah.
that sort of joyful, like, oh God, I need to reach for it again, sort of thing that I just find
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
delightful.
I love stuff like that.
Yeah,
To
right?
know that there's a place that I can go to remind me how to do X.
Absolutely.
I'm all for it. Awesome. Okay, our next question.
Well,
Do you
please.
prefer dev or ops?
Ooh. So I've spent most of my career as a dev. So like my heart will always be in dev, but like I've recently started dipping my toes more and more into ops, and like I have a very, very solid appreciation for it. And like again, I'm gonna sound like a broken record. Y'all are so nice. Like the community is so sweet, and I just like inviting. Like I spoke at my first DevOps event last year. It was a DevOps Days New York, and it was just such an incredible event. And folks are so like open minded and like inviting and like so thoughtful and so provocative in a good way as well. Like I really enjoyed my time there, and I feel like I'm learning a lot. It's just like rediscovering a new aspect of your career. It's kind of like picking up a new programming
Yes.
language. Like you're just sort of
Yeah.
like picking up new things, and like I think there's a lot of consideration and considerable work being done there that like I'm finding myself really drawn to.
Yeah, that's such a great way of putting it because I think like for me, DevOps was it was like a milestone in my career. It
Yeah.
was the moment like it was I for me it was a turning point because it
Mm,
was where I'm like, oh, I like infrastructure stuff, but I also like coding and I can do both. What? And it
right.
was like,
And like just the thought that just the fact that like so much like really good tooling is being made to make this more accessible for folks. Like for me, onboarding is always a question with this sort of thing. It's both like
oh
it's a
yeah.
double edged sword, and like I find that as folks, like especially in the ops communities, like are taking all of these steps to make these tools, make all of this like all this learning that we had to do in one way or another, perhaps more painstakingly than others, more accessible, is something that I'm finding really compelling.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the fact that we've been able to transcend beyond bash scripting,
Right?
which, I mean, I love a good bash script, don't get me wrong. But I definitely appreciate all this other tooling that is
Totally.
now available for our convenience.
Semi related. Like it's funny you mentioned that because like it's sort of related to Windows and shell scripting. I had to build a so like one of the things that I do at my main job at DevCraft Academy is like give folks training in reviewing pull requests and like giving like
Mm,
kind, thoughtful, constructive, not necessarily nice, because nice is like superficial, but like kind in me for me is like really pushing towards like this is great, this is how it can be better. So I'm like really pushing for a lot of that stuff. And one of the things that happen, especially like as folks are getting more experience in like contributing actively to teams, is giving your files and folders names that are not going to make Windows explode, because Windows has pretty strict conventions for how you name your files. So I was like,
yes, yes.
okay, no problem. I'll just like add a little like existing GitHub action that like validates those names. But it turns out like the thing I need didn't really exist. So I was like, well, guess I'm going to have to write my own. And I had to dip
Yep.
my toes into shell scripting for this. And good golly, did I struggle. And at the end, like my client was like, why don't you just make a Ruby script for it? And I was like, that's an option? Oh, goodness. And then it took 5 minutes.
I feel yeah, yeah. There were a few instances where I'm like, on the path towards creating like this horrible shell script, and then
Mm,
I'm like, I can do it in Python.
exactly. But it's sort
I'm
of like,
like sold.
I mean, isn't that one of the most wonderful things about tech is that you have these tools available and like you have the right, like, I don't know, something I've been thinking about a lot lately, kind of a side note, is that like when we're introducing folks to like tech in general and like we sort of like build up this sort of image, not on purpose, I don't think, and definitely not maliciously, that there is a perfect learning path that they have to
Yes,
take, or there's like learn this and this and you're good in this exact order. And like whether we like it
yes,
or not, there's no set path, because if there was, it'd be documented, right?
yep,
So and I feel like one of the things that I would love to like to communicate more and want to do a better job at communicating is that like, look, there's never going to be a perfect tool for a job. It's going to be the one that works best for you. Like think working solo or working with your team, there's going to be the one that works best for y'all. For example, writing a script, going to be Python for you, going to be Ruby for me, and that's like neither is wrong. Like
exactly.
in most circumstances, if they're like, I don't know, running something on some embedded thing that only works on Python, sure, then your options are a little bit more limited. But like again, working within your means and like picking the right tool for the job, I think is so much more important than like having like what is the most optimal tooling for the job.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree with you, and I think that speaks to it even makes me think actually about that. That's how I feel about agile, where
About?
like agile,
Oh yeah.
where I feel like especially generally, I think as an industry, we've invested so much time in like the structure around agile, and especially
Mhm.
a lot of people equate agile with scrum, even though
Sure.
scrum is an approach to agile.
Yeah.
And I detest scrum. I detest safe agile because
Fair.
it defeats the purpose
Yeah.
of what agile is, which is agility and
Yeah.
fast feedback loops. And people get so caught up in you have to do it this and this way, that and get caught up in the ceremonies, that
Mm.
you end up completely forgetting the point of why you were doing this in the first place. And so what I've always found has worked really well, where I've seen teams being really successful at agile, is when they pick and choose the things that work best for them. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, Scrum has an interesting concept that, you know what, it works really well for our team. And maybe Safe has a thing, and maybe Kanban. So
Absolutely.
then you pick and choose these different approaches, and it's a choose your own adventure. And
Hmm.
it's similar with like solving it's similar with like what you were saying around like learning paths. There because people learn so differently, and what clicks well with one person won't click well with another person. We have visual learners, we have non-visual learners, so what's going to work best. And so of course, as you said, you can't say like this is the path, or if you learn these tools that is going to take you to where you need to be, because it may not.
I mean, to the point of like, learning differently. I actually got pushback on that from. Do you by any chance know somebody called Felina Hermans?
I don't.
Oh, so she wrote this fantastic book called The Programmer's Brain. Highly recommend it. She's a
Ooh,
neuroscientist, I believe. Don't
okay.
don't quote me on that, but she does a lot of work around the neuroscience and like how that works into program. She's working on this programming language called Hedi, which like is like pushing back on monolinguism in that like you can write it in any spoken language you want.
Oh, whoa, that's
Right?
cool.
Right?
That's
Anyway,
wild.
so we had her on the Bad Website Club for like, learning how to learn and all of that. And she was because I very said like, well, yeah, we all learn differently. And she goes like, actually, we don't. I can't remember why, but I remember that pushback. So whenever I
Damn.
hear like we all learn differently, it's like, wait a minute, apparently we don't. But like I think there's something to be said for like the aspects of like, because I used to teach children to code, and like actually one of my favorite things I've ever done was, I was never the best student, but one of like at university, but like one of my favorite things I did was actually my bachelor thesis, which I wrote about like my experience teaching children to code and comparing that with like established research in technical pedagogy for children. And like there's these two learning theories that exist. One is called constructivism and one is called constructionism. And I'm going to focus on the latter, which says that our learning is modular, where we pick up different, like, let's say like Lego blocks and
Uh-huh.
apply them and analogize, compare them with those other pieces of knowledge and make them fit together, which if you think about it goes back to what we're talking about, like recognizing patterns. And
Hmm.
what I love about that is that it kind of gives a freedom of, for example, choosing your learning path. And then like when we think about like how we learn and stuff, and like when we do like developer relations and we create different types of content, for example, we like there's a lot of metrics that say like, oh, short form video is super popular right now, and maybe written content not so much. Like personally, I prefer written content for learning, but there's aspects of video that are very helpful. But like what I found is that like people have their preferences, people have their own learning styles that they
Hmm.
prefer, and like having that flexibility is going to help you so much more. I went off on a tangent and I apologize.
I love that tangent, and you know what? I'm going to go off on a similar tangent because
Please.
you made me think of. So my daughter attended Montessori school for many years,
Yeah.
because I'm like super jealous of her education, because like what I love about Montessori is that it really embraces like it's all about individualism, but it also teaches you
Mm.
to work as part of a community. And what I
Ooh.
especially loved is, so my daughter, our first parent teacher interview that I had with her teacher, and she started when she was 3 in Montessori, and she did it up until she turned 13. And so her first parent teacher interview, her teacher's like, yeah, Hannah's not learning very well. And
Oh.
also, she stole a bunch of stuff from the classroom. I'm like, oh my God, my first parent teacher
Oh.
interview, my kid's a klepto. I'm sorry, Hannah. I know you edit this podcast. I hope I'm not embarrassing you. And then I'm like, oh my God, what's so I'm like panicky. I'm like, I
Yeah.
went from proud parent to like, oh my God. And then Hannah has a very unique learning style where she hates being told what to do. Like, and I mean, like everything's on her own terms. And her teacher
Yeah.
Cecile, who like we're still friends with to this day because she cracked the Hannah code, she determined that in order to teach Hannah how to do something, she had to go and show it to one of Hannah's classmates. And then Hannah would
Ooh.
walk over, like,
Oh.
learning by observing. Don't teach
Ooh.
me. I will I will learn this way. And her teacher Cecile cracked the code. And basically, and then Hannah went through this phase, I think she was like 4 or 5, where she
Yeah.
decided she wanted to sew. So she would like she sewed like gowns and stuff. Like when she graduated kindergarten, she sewed her own like grad dress thing,
Wow.
and she was like full on obsessed with the sewing. And her teacher Cecile again, then okay, you love the sewing. Let's incorporate other aspects into the sewing. How can we incorporate
Yes.
math? How can we incorporate, you know, science or whatever, like things into the learning to help her learn. And so ever since then, it's really made me appreciate seeing how she grew up versus
Yeah.
how I grew up, which was very, you know, like very traditional. Like I'm South American. I've got like my mom had very very distinct ideas of
Yep.
how I should learn. And you know, I spent like a summer memorizing my times tables because that is what you do. Um,
Yep. I can relate.
so
I have that.
so you know, as a result of that, it's really she's opened my eyes to
Hmm.
like how people learn. And even like my husband is dyslexic and I'm a fast reader, and being around him, I've had to like first of all learn to slow down. I can't just like
Yep.
show him a thing, here, read this right now, and he's like, I need a minute. But
Yep.
also recognize the fact that like even though like he doesn't let dyslexia get the best of him,
Yep.
he's found coping mechanisms. So it's so fascinating to see how different people adapt to different situations, how they will learn things differently. And I think that's like the most magical thing. And that, yeah, I love that.
No, 100%. I just want to clarify the face I made when you told me that she had like, don't tell me how to learn. Whew, that hit like a very familiar nerve for me of like, I mean, that's why I say I wasn't the best student, because like, and like, it was so fascinating to see like how differently I would approach. Because if a professor like at university would tell me like, read this book and like spit out its contents on an exam paper 3 months later, I'm like,
Right.
the man doesn't tell me what to do. But if a client or like somebody or like, a higher up tells me, it's like, hey, you should read this book, it's really helped me with my career, I was like, oh, thank you, I will. And I read it with gusto, and I'm like, I take notes and stuff. I'm like, then I look at it, I'm like, wait a minute, who am I? And like, I know that's me, that like I have like, attitude and stuff, but like, I do think it's really like, I mean, that kind of helps us sort of like reframe as well, like how we approach these different problems and stuff. Like, reframing is such a powerful tool. Like,
Oh my God, yes.
right? Like, not fully related to learning, but like, I do a lot of talking about like like tech speaking and public speaking and that sort of thing. And like, I I will be very embracing of the fact that I get so nervous every time I go on stage, right? And like,
Yep, yep.
right, and like, I used to help run this thing called Global Diversity CFP Day. CFP standing for, call for proposals at conferences, when they invite folks to propose their talks and stuff. And like, I was like, do you know what? I'm going to give a short presentation about getting nervous. And like, I just went on Twitter, this was like, gosh, I want to say like 3 years ago, and just like gathered so much empirical evidence from folks of like, how nervous do you get? How nervous do you get relative to when you're going up on stage and that sort of thing? And like, something I found so magical, like there was one person who replied with by saying like, I've been speaking for 14 years and I get nervous every single time. I increasingly get unbearable to be around the closer it's time for me to get up on stage. But then they said, and I'm so grateful for the fact that I get nervous, because I've reframed it as excitement, as caring. And if I'm not nervous when I'm going up on stage, it means that I don't care about what I'm presenting about and I'm going to do a bad job. And I was like, whoa,
Oh, damn.
right? Like,
Oh my God, I love that so much.
it's such a powerful reframing. And like, I don't get me wrong, it's not about like lying to yourself or anything. I think it's just like about looking at the things that you experience in, and like, for example, learning, and like how you take things in, and just like rethinking about how you approach them is so powerful.
Yeah, I love that so much. Yeah, because I mean, I always get nervous before
Oh, same.
talks, and I've learned to just accept it, you know,
Hmm.
and that's okay. And I also know myself well enough that like once I get up on stage and unwind a bit, and I just get into the groove, and then it's like autopilot, and it's such a magical feeling too when that
it's
kicks in.
it's the best. Like, I always joke that it's like, to get a little bit math nerdy, it's like a tangent graph, like a tan graph, where it's like little not nervous, super 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 nervous, and then like, pff, and then I'm like
Yeah.
in another plane of existence. And
Yes.
like I know that my speaking style tends to be like very like engaging and like energetic and stuff, and then people come up to it's like, oh my god, you're so like I don't get me wrong, I appreciate it. This isn't to like humble brag or anything. I have a point, but like they'll come and be like, oh my gosh, you're so energetic. It's so cool. Like, how do you do it? And I was like, yo, what you're seeing is like anxiety and and adrenaline, just like in human form. Don't get
I
me wrong.
can
I try to
so
do a good job,
relate to that.
right?
Yeah, people are like, you're so peppy. And then, it's like when you said like, you won't believe it, but I'm actually like very shy. I'm like, I am too. I can so relate. And people meet me, they're like, oh, you're so outgoing. It's like, yeah, and then get me in a room full of people I don't know, and I'm the one, in the corner texting a friend, going, "Oh my god, help me!"
That was me at my first meetup. I had a little weird, like, let's call it a science experiment a few years ago, where I went to speak at a conference in Romania, in Bucharest. Had a really good time. They took such good care of me. But like I arrived, earlier in the day, and I went out to get lunch. I was by myself, and like I realized I was being so, I don't know what the term is, shy, nervous, uncomfortable. Like I felt uncomfortable even ordering food by myself, right? And then like we went out then it was time for the speaker dinner. I kind of awkwardly went up to some folks at the in the hotel lobby that didn't really, they gave off that vibe as, we don't really know anyone here, and we're gonna go to a speaker dinner. And like I want to introduce myself to them, and then like we went to the speaker dinner after that, and like a couple of the folks I met were like, oh, I wonder where that guy got napkins. I could really use napkins, but I'm too shy to ask. And like, don't ask me why. My brain like rewired itself. It's like, don't worry, I'll take care of this. And I go, it's like, excuse me, sir, where did you get those napkins? Thinking back to the person like 3 hours, 5 hours ago, who was too shy to order lunch. And I'm like, what's going on? Right? I don't know. It's weird.
That's so cool. Yeah, it's funny how like certain things will trigger. Like I think of myself at like conferences, right?
Yeah.
Like I am on at conferences. I'm like I
Hmm.
put on the full on like extroverted thing, and 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 then I look back at it and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Who dat?
Yeah. Oh my God. I
It's like
so
a
feel that.
switch flicks, right? And sometimes like you're not even conscious of it. It's like something
Yeah.
goes off and you're like, yep,
And like, I got to be
extrovert
honest,
time.
I still don't know. Like, I don't even know if I fall in any of the two categories of introversion versus extroversion. Like, don't get me, I thrive on being on, as you put it, because it's very similar for me. It's like I'm a different person when I'm in public versus when I'm at home just like doom scrolling or something. But like it's I don't know, I kind of like that. Don't get me wrong. I think it's not that your like personality is like fragmented or something, or it's just, or anything like that, or that you're like putting on a show. I think it's an aspect of your personality that just comes out in those situations, and it's extremely valid.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what you mentioned earlier too, like why should we be put in a category of like you're either introverted or extroverted? Why can't it be shades of gray? Like everything else is shades of gray.
I was going to say,
There are seldom things that are binary. So like why
totally,
not why not this?
absolutely.
Okay, we're almost done the sort of done. No, we're not quite done. That's okay. This has been fun because like
I'm
I
having a
feel like
wonderful time.
we've dug into like all the topics through these questions. So I'm here for it.
I love it. This is
Okay.
so much fun.
Do you prefer JSON or YAML?
Ooh, I have a YAML story.
Oh,
So
tell.
so I was building back in my Objective C days, I was building a file renaming app, right? Like you drag in a bunch of files, you put in like a set of actions, and then it would rename those files for you. It's a pretty like complex app, and like it's how I learned regular expressions, by the way. Super fun. But regardless, I needed to, like, these chains of actions that you would take to rename the files, like insert these characters, put in numbers, find and replace, all of this stuff. Um, I needed to store these somewhere. And I was like, oh, I'll just store these as YAML, right? And so, like, for example, for find and replace, right, you could have like any string you wanted. And so I was like, cool, we'll just put in like, if I put in a letter Y, I ran into trouble because YAML doesn't interpret the letter Y as a letter Y, it interprets it as true. Now, and it gets wilder than that, because like you might think like, okay, well then like don't use the letter Y. Fair. But the same goes for on, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, the what's it called? The abbreviation for Ontario? ON?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. That's right.
But in YAML, on is true.
Derp.
And there's a bunch of these that
Yes, yes.
through these sort of like frustrations, I just switched over to Jason, and I have to admit it made my life significantly easier. So, do I prefer one to the other?
That was it for you. It's like, yep.
I have, I mean, don't get me wrong, like I'm a big like use the right tool for the job. I love, kind of have a soft spot for those quirks of YAML. Don't get me wrong, they're frustrating, but like I don't know, I just like it when a it's just like it when languages or technologies have there's a Spanish word that I love called that, it's mañas. It's like it's what makes you like, it's like when you're a picky eater, you're called mañoso or mañosa or mañose. It's like it's a quirk. That's the term, a quirk.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know, I find them endearing. So
I
like
love that.
in that context, of course, I prefer JSON, but like I don't know, I have a soft spot for YAML.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That's awesome. I love that. I love that viewpoint on it. Okay, on a similar vein, do you prefer spaces or tabs?
Uh, oh, oh, I prefer. So I mean, I use spaces. I mostly use spaces, but there's actually a reason to prefer tabs, and that is for accessibility.
Ooh, tell me
Um,
more.
like I cannot for the life of me recall what that article, but I read an article where somebody said, like, look, essentially the way like a screen reader or something is going to interpret tabs or spaces, it's gonna make more sense to have tabs. And I'm like,
Oh, that's so
do you know
cool.
what? Fair enough. Because at the end
That
of the
is
day,
so
a
cool.
tab is a character, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
so instead
A
of having,
character that represents a chunk of space.
exactly. And
Yeah.
like that feels more, let's say, screen readerly honest
Yeah.
than 2 to 4 spaces.
Yeah. Huh. That's so cool. I have not looked at it from that
I'll
perspective.
see if I
Very
can find the
awesome.
article and I'll send it to you.
Okay, cool, cool. Yeah, that would be awesome. Hopefully we can include that in our show notes. Okay. I think you answered this question in one of your earlier statements, but I will ask it formally. Do you prefer to consume content through video or text?
I think I yeah, no, you I did kind of there was somewhere in my rambling it was there. I think I prefer text, but it really depends on like what I'm trying to do. For like, I don't know, like I think I mentioned, yeah, I did mention that like I installed a liquid cooler into my PC. For that
Hmm.
kind of thing, a video was much more helpful. But
Yeah.
like, and for certain
Yeah.
code things, especially for like navigating dashboards and that sort of thing, I don't know why I'm bad at dashboards. I don't know what's up. Like I feel like I every time like a dashboard gets updated, I'm like, am I bad at tech? So I find videos really helpful for helping me navigate dashboards and that sort of thing. But there's a balance to it. There's a really great book on documentation called Docs for Developers,
Hmm.
and they mention like, you know, having this versatility of content that I find really really helpful. So it's, I know I'm tending to answer things where I don't really commit to one side or the other, but
No, no, I love it. I love hearing like the different reasons for the different things. This is great. This is great. It's
thank you.
all the different perspectives. I appreciate it.
You're very kind, but like, yeah, I think there's just nuances to this sort of thing that make them more relevant for one or the other. I like talking about creating content, video or text.
Hmm.
Um,
Ooh, I
like
should add that one.
it's ooh, let me tell you, I love live streaming. I love writing like prose or tutorials or guides and that sort of thing. I am so bad at videos, and I don't know why. Because like I think the script has to go so perfectly. Like, did you do a lot of like did you pre-record any talks during like when there were a lot of conferences were online?
I wasn't doing talks at that point,
Okay,
but I did have a recent experience. So this year I launched my video course on observability through O'Reilly,
awesome.
and I had to do a lot of recording for that. Like the whole thing is a video course. And, I thought, okay, once I handed in my slides, like
Yeah.
it would be easy to record the video because I had all my speaker notes and stuff. Oh my God. I can't tell you how hard it was to record the video for that. That was like the number of times I would spend sometimes like an hour on one slide because I'd be like tripping over my words and I'd be like, oh, it's so frustrating.
There's and first of all, I feel you so much. Like I just triple like I don't know why every time I have to record some video, like I do some video courses for Egghead, and like every time I have to pre-record a video, I always naively think to myself, I can do this in one take, no problem. I do stuff in one take all the time, not taking into consideration that I trip over my words constantly, or like I mess up and I just like sort of just like blankly stare into space for a minute. I was
Oh
like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
right, where
Yep,
I'm
yep,
like
yep.
um, my friend Cassie Evans released a montage. She does like stuff with greens, I believe, with Greentalk, animation, CSS animation stuff, and she released a montage of like all of the time she's messed up and sworn at, like let out a swear word,
Oh my
and
God, I
that
can so
gave me
relate.
so much life. I love that because we've all done it. Let's be honest.
Oh
Every
my
time,
God.
hi,
The
my name is
number of
Carmen, and
outtakes I have going,
yeah.
motherfucker.
Honestly, even for like a 2 minute video for like I'm going to speak at a conference next month on about like dependency management, and they're like, hey, do you mind like recording a 2 minute video for us? And I was like, well, there you go, 3 hours. Because I'm just like, hi, my name is Carmen, and damn it, hi, my name is Carmen, and I'm here to damn it, and like it's just that a bunch of that, it's
Yes,
the worst.
yes. It is. I like yesterday I was putting together a video to accompany a blog post that I'd written.
Yeah,
I don't know why I thought like let's do a video too. Like I find video work challenging as just
same.
as you mentioned, and it was a similar thing, like a 3 minute video. It took me an hour to record it. And also I'm like, I don't need a script.
Oh my god.
And I do need a script. I do. I'm sorry, me, but you do.
Like, so like I don't know, like with talks it's different. With talks it's like I don't need a script, I don't need like speaker notes, like I'm fine, I can just wing it, it's totally cool. Like for some reason I just sort of like come up with the script in my head, and don't ask me why, but I like it's not so much a script, I like to call it a mental choreograph of how I give a presentation. um and like I don't know, timing and stuff, it's just all in there. But with a video it's just not the same, and I don't know why,
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah,
weird.
it ends up more robotic for some reason. Like
Yeah,
I look at myself in videos, especially like the one I did yesterday, thankfully was a voiceover. But
yeah.
if you're doing a video with your face on it, now it's like, oh my God, I've got resting bitch face, or like I look like a robot or whatever, right? It's like,
And
ah,
the silly thing about that is that we're the only ones looking at those aspects of ourselves,
I
right?
know,
Because
right?
everyone else is like focused on the content.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, they're like, why is their face there?
I mean,
Like,
not even that. They're just like
who
not
cares?
like barely registering it. It's just like, yep, that's a face talking to me. It's not like
Yeah.
because it's not like me where I'm looking at myself going like, oh god, my hair, like I look so sweaty. Oh my god, like that sort of thing.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we tend to be so self-critical, and
Totally.
I don't have the answer for that. I tell people don't be self-critical. Meanwhile, I'm like, "Oh my god, everything sucks."
Do as I say,
Like,
not as I do.
yeah, exactly.
Totally.
Exactly. That's okay. That's what therapy is for. It's helping me get through.
Same.
Okay. Oh, we have one more question left. Hey.
Cool. I'm excited.
Okay. What is your superpower?
Oh gosh. That one's actually gonna stump me. What is my superpower? I I'm gonna sound naive maybe, but like I think so. I used to frame it as like if a dummy like me can do it, so can you. I'm trying to reframe that into a little bit more of an expertise because I owe myself some credit. But like
Yeah, absolutely.
I think my superpower might be making things approachable. Um
Yes. Great
And I
point.
mean and I mean that in every sense of the word. Like one of my favorite projects I ever did back in my days at CodeC, where we were doing a tool, we are making a tool on a complex code based understanding. And I was like, well, it's Hacktoberfest. We need a live stream. Carmen, do you have an idea? And I was like, how about we get a bunch of like open source maintainers, have them onboard me onto their project using our tools, never having looked at the code before, not even tried the programming language before. And like, it was, it's onboarding. So, and I have no sense of dignity, so I bought a little sailor outfit and like, they were onboarding me to the ship and
I
like
love it.
it was a lot of fun. And but I felt like that sort of like relaxation and like, embracing what is it? Failing, how does I put it? Failing positively, failing safely,
Mhm.
taking privilege into consideration, of course, but like failing safely and responsibly, something I think that's something that I'm good at. I remember I have one more story. I had so like I was doing we are teaching JavaScript online for free at the Bad Website Club, and like we're doing the free code camp exercises. They're very kind, they're very cool people. There was one exercise there called the record collection exercise, which where you had to manipulate a complex JavaScript object with a function, and it was pretty complex. And like I was so what this was like an hour of live streaming where I would just go through and explain the solutions that I would write as I wrote them and explain concepts and that sort of thing. And I got so stuck, like I got extremely stuck, couldn't make it work. And I remember panicking, like on the inside, of course, I'm very good at hiding it. Um, I remember panicking, being like, "Oh my gosh, not this isn't working." And people in the chat were like, "I'm so lost. What is she doing? Try like, have you tried doing this and this and that?" And I couldn't process it. I was just like, anyway, and I felt like a failure, but I did eventually get it. I, spent like 20 minutes of that 60-minute live stream going through this exercise. And then like I disconnected, sat down, I had a tiny cry, but then I got a message from somebody being like, "Hey, Carmen, you know, that looked really tough. Congratulations on beating that exercise. I just wanted to write you and say, like, thank you for showing me that even someone who's been developing for software for 15 years is going to get stuck on stuff occasionally." And that to me felt like probably the biggest victory of my career, where I made something seem more approachable, where I just added that human side of it. Like I think especially as we're finding our
Yes.
first roles, we forget, especially if we've been in tech for a while, we forget what it's like to look up to folks and think like, well, they know everything. It's kind of like when we're
Yes.
children and we look at grown-ups and we're like, oh yeah, they've got everything figured out. And then I'm 36 and I'm like still waiting for that to happen. you know? And like I think
Yeah,
the same happens with tech, And I think that might be my
absolutely.
superpower, just sort of like
That's such a beautiful
embracing.
story.
Yeah,
Oh, I love that. I love that so much. And you know, I and you give off very approachable vibes.
that's very
Like
kind.
honestly, like you're very friendly and bubbly, and
Thank you.
I feel like you're someone I'd want to learn from. And I
Oh,
think
thank
making tech
you.
approachable. Oh, no problem. Like honestly, making tech approachable and putting a friendly face to it is so important, especially like I I think for women in tech that's so important too, especially
Totally.
because so many of us come in intimidated, absolutely intimidated, especially because it's still a man's world in tech, and we
Yeah.
gotta and being able to show other people that a we exist,
Yep.
and B, like, we're friendly and approachable, come learning with us, I think is so, so important.
I agree 100%. And if I may say likewise, like you have made this experience of talking to you and podcasting, I feel like I've known you for ages. It's the
I
strangest
know,
thing.
I feel like we're like besties.
Right? And like and I think that is that same application of like making something approachable, making it not comfortable in a let's say more like let's say marshmallowy way, but like making folks comfortable to, for example, something as perhaps straightforward from the outside as asking questions. Like we take
Mhm.
for granted how scary it
Yes.
is to ask questions, and knowing like what's a proper heuristic of when to ask a question, especially as you're starting out, and like especially if you don't work in a very positively reinforcing team. Like how do I ask questions? Like, what is the right time? Like, I have a little hack for that actually. Like, even though like I might know the answer to something, if we're in a meeting or something, I'm still gonna ask the question, being like, "What are KPIs? What is SEO or whatever?" And like, I find that like make it's that aspect of approachability. Maybe it's my focus point.
Yeah, yeah. I really like that, and I think forcing yourself to ask questions, and because like I remember so early on in my career, I'd be sitting
Mm,
in a meeting absolutely lost and just like not knowing what's going on, and I've started to just like I force myself because it's so scary too. Like
It really
especially
is.
when you're in a room of people who are so confident and they exude confidence, but they might not actually know anything, or they might
Yeah.
not know as much as they let on. Let's say.
Yeah.
And so I've taken to just like take a deep breath, ask the question, and I kind of take the Columbo approach on. And like for folks who are younger, I'm sorry if you don't know who Columbo is. You should definitely look up Columbo. He was this awesome detective on TV. But his approach was like kind of it was kind of the bumbling idiot question. So it wasn't that I presented myself as a bumbling idiot, but I'd be like, just for my own education to clarify for me, could you explain what this means? And taking that sort of approach. And people are usually more than happy to answer that question that you
Absolutely.
have, which is like that's another thing that I learned. It's like ask and ye shall
Absolutely.
receive.
And there's almost like a bystander effect to it where like maybe everyone wants to ask that question but they don't feel like it's the right space to, and like by doing so you kind of open that door and like allow more conversations to flow. And like especially for those like in a higher position of privilege, I highly encourage them to lend it and like make
Yes.
things more accessible for folks.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's one of the things I enjoy about being a DevRel as well
Yeah.
is I find like the thing that kind of launched my blogging, my tech blogging was like I'd be spending all this time like trying to figure stuff out, and then I'm like, oh my god, this was a doozy. I got to write about this for my own benefit so that I can, and I've referred back to my blog posts that I've written in the past. I'm like, thank you, past me. I forgot this. But also like my thought is like, if I have this question, chances are others will too. And I also like to document like these are all the places where I messed up. And so you might want to check this too. Like I try to include a list of gotchas depending on what I'm writing. And I think that's really important.
I agree 100%. In fact, you reminded me like one of the things that I always like, especially when folks are starting out with like public speaking and that sort of thing, like they're always like, what is the one number one thing that we hear? And like, I feel it myself from time to time too, because I'm human. And it's like, I have nothing to talk about. And I was like, and I always tell them, look, there's one audience member that you want to be targeting, and that is yourself from 4 months ago who would have benefited from this talk.
Mm,
And like, as long as you've got that
yes.
one person, because there's always going to be one person who watches something or like reads something that you've created and will, they might reach out, they might not, but like know that people are benefiting from that, especially like, yourself from the future. Like you said, I think it happened to me once already that like, that I Googled like a problem and I was like, oh, I wrote a blog post about this.
It's like, yes.
It's a great feeling.
It is. I know. Yeah. And so like and that's why I also encourage people to like blog stuff that they learn about
Totally.
because like I had this one mentee and I was trying to give him some direction on his career. I'm like, you know what, blog stuff on Medium, and within months he got a lot more followers than me on Medium. I'm like,
No
damn. and,
way.
and I'm genuinely happy for him because
Absolutely.
he writes about like I believe he does like work in AWS, and he does a lot of stuff around APIs, and that's something that resonates with the community. So like for him to get that many followers means that he's writing about stuff that really like touches a chord.
Resonates.
It's like things that people want to know about. So I'm very happy to have encouraged him to do that. And every so often when I see one of his
Amazing.
blog posts, I'm like,
And
oh
like,
yay.
if I may, you absolutely like deserve to give yourself credit as well for like playing a part in that. Like I think it's not something that like I don't know, I find that oftentimes we don't give ourselves enough credit for the work that we do and encouraging others and like taking some credit for it for ourselves and being like, "You know what? I did play a part." That's significant.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yeah, that's true. We do need to remember that we
Yeah,
we
totally.
influence people's lives in different ways.
Absolutely.
That's so awesome. Well, I think we're coming up on time, and we got through all the lightning round questions, and this was like honestly such a fun application of the lightning round questions because it just like turned into so many fun topics that we got to dig into, and I swear I could just keep asking you more and more questions.
Same.
Um,
I'm having such a good
I
time.
think it just means I'll have to have you on at another point again.
I'd love that. Thank
That
you.
would be so fun. So yeah, before we part ways, do you have any words of advice that you want to impart on our audience, or hot takes if you have any? Either is good.
Yeah, I think, like for me, very much a topic that's been very recent in my life is just sort of like trying to decouple myself from my online self, by which I mean, or like my professional self, and like trying to learn, like not so much in a work life balance kind of thing, in terms more of a like identity sense of like, am I a programmer or a human, or am I a dev? Am I an ops person? Am I a human being? Like, where do those coalesce? I don't even know if coalesce is the right word, but I'm going to go with it. Um, and I've been trying to take steps to sort of like maybe be a little bit less online, maybe be like, I was having a conversation with somebody today about trends in tech and like FOMO, fear of missing out, and like lately that sort of like evolved for me in the last couple of years into something that I called AOMO, which is more ambivalence of missing out. um and trying to not I mean, of course, mental health is very important, but also like trying to, I don't know, somebody gave me some advice once, which was something like, you're only as helpful as you are capable, in terms of energy, in terms of
Mm,
like, capacity. If you take on too many mentees, the quality of your mentorship is going to decline. And I
so
think that,
true.
right? And I feel like a lot of that applies to, I mean, like I'm talking about mentorship as if there's some kind of like seniority to that advice. And there really isn't. I think that this applies to a lot of aspects of my career. My friend Jess gave me some advice that I really love, which is that my phone is not allowed in my bedroom. And that has been
Ooh,
such a game changer for me. First of all, because like the alarm sounds on my phone, I have to get up and go turn it off, as opposed to get
yeah,
up, like sort of groggily turn it off and then go back to sleep. And I find that like, yeah, I guess I'm trying to like decouple myself a little bit in terms of like, social media is very impactful and is giving me so many opportunities for my career. But at the same time, I know that in in my weaker moments, it has dictated my life a little bit. So I'm trying to like,
yeah.
go easy on myself and that sort of thing. And just, but at the same time, I'm gonna not, I'm trying to feel less bad for feeling bad, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, and generally, my friend Sylvia, when we were getting to know each other, I adore her to bits. She gave me some advice that I really love, which is that, like, you need to present more as an expert. Like, and that is such a weird little contrast to like making it like making things accessible. You also need to present a little bit more as an expert. It's something I'm figuring out. So it's not so much advice as like, this is what's going on in my life. But I think there's some resonance there with folks, so I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, yeah, that's so helpful. And I think, you've said so many insightful things, and
Oh,
I
thank you.
really, really enjoyed our conversation today. This has
Same.
been a real, real treat and definitely brightened up my Tuesday.
Oh, same. If I may say, like, you made this so approachable and so easy and so comfortable. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate that. Well, and with that, thank you so much, Carmen, for geeking out with me today. Y'all don't forget
Thank
to
you.
subscribe and be sure to check the show notes for additional resources and to connect with us and our guests on social media. Until next time.
Peace out and geek out.
Geeking Out is hosted and produced by me, Adriana Vilela. I also compose and perform the theme music on my trusty clarinet. Geeking Out is also produced by my daughter, Hannah Maxwell, who incidentally designed all of the cool graphics. Be sure to follow us on all the socials by going to bento.me/geekingout.